Hi there, happy hump day and welcome to Wednesday. Change. There's no doubt change is all around us, and when you think about change in society, it's created by pressure. So in nature, water is turned into steam because of the pressure of heat that's applied. In societies, new laws are created, often because of the pressure from people in the community to change laws, change regulations. And it's the same in organisations. There's some type of pressure that's applied that sparks the need for change. And that pressure can either come from internal, so inside the organisation, or outside the organisation. So when you think of external forces, you can things like the environment, changes in the social landscape, community expectations, regulations, new technology. Internal forces can include things like changes in leadership teams, new structures, cost pressures, mergers, acquisitions, the change in an organisational's life cycle. But none of these forces happen in isolation from each other. And often you'll find that change is driven from multiple sources, but with differing and varying levels of impact. Now, successful organisations, they know that they need one eye external, one eye internal to really understand what's happening. They know that they can't stand still, because if they do, they're going to join that very long list of businesses, organisations that have become an endangered species and no longer exist. I always love the quote from Jack Welch, who said, when the rate of change inside an institution becomes slower than the rate of change outside, the end's in sight. But organisational change doesn't occur in a vacuum. And that's why it's really important that when you're thinking about change and how to make change happen in an organisation, that you understand the system in which that organisational change is trying to take place. Organisations are connected. There are a myriad of relationships, interrelationships, connections, dependencies. And we often hear people talk about how organisations and the world that we work in today is ambiguous and it's complex, it's connected, and that there's all these interdependencies. And consequently, because of the complexity in which we work, the connections that exist across an organisational system, if you're making change in one part of the organisation and you're not thinking about the downstream or the upstream impacts that change might have, it can easily lead to unintended consequences, and consequences that may not be good for you, your team, or for the organisation. And I always think that a perfect example of this is the introduction of the cane toad back in the 1930s in Queensland. So the cane toad was introduced into far north Queensland because the whole idea was there was a cane beetle, and that cane beetle was destroying the crops, the sugarcane crops. And so they thought, great, we can use this cane toad to eat the cane beetles. But they hadn't thought about the system in which those cane toads were going to be introduced. There was no natural predator for the cane toad. And so what happened, and for anyone who lives in far north Queensland or down the eastern states would know, and even into the Northern Territory, the cane toad has spread. And so a decision at one point, which was seen as a good thing to do, let's bring in something to get rid of the cane beetle so that we have better sugarcane crops, has had a massive unintended consequences and impacts to the environment. And it's the same in your organisation. If you're not thinking about the system in which that change is getting introduced, a change that in one part of the organisation that can seem good, reasonable, a sensible thing to do, can have negative consequences in other parts of the organisation. So it's therefore really critical that when you're thinking about introducing change, that you think holistically. Don't think narrow, go broad, go deep. And also ask yourself questions in terms of what's driving the change. Is it an incremental change, or is it really a transformational change? Is it coming proactively or reactively? Is it an adaptive challenge that means that we're not only changing systems and processes, but we're also changing the things that people need to do in terms of not just how they behave, but also how they think? Is this a change that's just impacting one part of the organisation? And if it is, what are the downstream or the upstream potential impacts from that? And who's going to be directly or indirectly impacted from it? Change, it's one of those things that's always going to happen, but it can't be considered in isolation. So next time that you're thinking about a change, just ask yourself a question. If we do this, could we be potentially releasing cane toads into our organisation? Take care, and I'll see you next week.